Emma had always loved exploring antique shops. The mystery of old, forgotten items fascinated her. On a cold January evening, as the sun set and the streets turned eerily quiet, she stumbled upon a shop she had never noticed before. The sign above the door read, "Timeless Treasures." Curiosity pulled her in. The shop was cramped and dusty, filled with shelves of strange, old objects. Faded paintings, cracked vases, and odd trinkets lined the walls. But it was something in the corner window that caught Emma's eye, a doll. It wasn't like any doll she had seen before. It had delicate porcelain skin, dressed in a faded Victorian gown. The blue ribbons on its dress were tattered, and a faint crack ran from its left eye down to its pale cheek. The doll's blue glass eyes were startlingly lifelike, almost as if they were staring right at her. Emma couldn't look away. There was something unsettling about it, but at the same time, she felt drawn to it. As she reached out to touch it, a voice startled her. "You've noticed her." Emma turned to see the shopkeeper, an elderly man with a thin, weathered face. His expression was grim. "That doll has been here for years. People come, admire her, but they always bring her back." Emma raised an eyebrow. "Why? What's wrong with her?" The man hesitated before replying. "Strange things happen to those who take her home. Some say she's cursed. Others say, she's alive." Emma chuckled nervously. "Come on, it's just a doll. You're just trying to scare me." The man didn't smile. "I'm warning you. Once you take her, she's yours. And she doesn't like being abandoned." Ignoring his words, Emma decided to buy the doll. She handed over the cash, and the shopkeeper wrapped it in brown paper. "Don't say I didn't warn you," he muttered as she left. That night, Emma placed the doll on the highest shelf in her room, thinking it would make an interesting decoration. But as she lay in bed, drifting into sleep, she thought she heard something, a faint whisper. Her name. She sat up quickly, her heart racing. The room was silent. The doll, sitting still on the shelf, seemed to be watching her. Emma placed the doll on the bookshelf in her living room. It looked odd but somehow fit with the antique-style furniture she loved. For the first few days, everything seemed normal. But then, small things started to happen. It began with her books. One morning, Emma found a pile of them on the floor. She frowned, picking them up. "Must have been the wind," she muttered, though the windows had been closed. She set the books back on the shelf and went about her day. That evening, as Emma was watching TV, she noticed something strange. The doll seemed to be facing a different direction than before. Its glassy blue eyes were no longer looking out at the room but directly at her. Emma laughed nervously. "I must have bumped it when I cleaned," she told herself. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The next night, Emma was in bed when she heard a soft thud from the living room. Her heart skipped a beat. She stayed still, listening. Another thud. And then, the sound of tiny footsteps on the wooden floor. "No," Emma whispered, clutching the blanket. "It's just my imagination." But the sounds didn't stop. Gathering her courage, Emma grabbed her phone and turned on the flashlight. Slowly, she crept toward the living room. The doll was on the floor, lying face down. Emma froze. She was sure she had left it sitting upright on the shelf. Her pulse quickened as she bent to pick it up. Its cold, porcelain face stared back at her, and for a moment, she thought its expression had changed, a faint, eerie smile. Shaking her head, Emma placed the doll back on the shelf. "I'm being ridiculous," she said aloud, trying to convince herself. But as she walked away, she felt a chill run down her spine, like someone was watching her. That night, Emma dreamed of the doll. In her dream, its eyes blinked, and it whispered her name in a childlike voice. When she woke, her chest was tight, and she felt drained, as if the dream had stolen her energy. The doll was no longer on the shelf. It was sitting on her desk, staring at her. Emma tried to brush off the unsettling events of the past few days, convincing herself that stress and overthinking were making her imagine things. But deep down, a creeping fear had started to take root. One afternoon, as she walked to the grocery store, she felt a strange sensation, like someone was following her. The streets were quiet, with only a few people around. She glanced over her shoulder but saw nothing unusual. "Miss, you." The soft voice startled her, and she spun around. An old woman stood a few feet away. Her face was lined with wrinkles, and her gray eyes were sharp and piercing. She wore a long, dark coat, and her hands were clasped tightly around a cane. "Excuse me," Emma asked, taking a cautious step back. "You have the doll," the woman said in a low, almost accusing tone. Emma froze. "How do you know that?" The woman stepped closer, her cane tapping against the pavement. "I know because I've seen her before. You shouldn't have taken her. She's dangerous." Emma forced a laugh, though her chest felt tight. "It's just a doll. I think you're mistaken." "No," the woman said sharply. "I'm not mistaken. That doll belonged to a girl who died tragically many years ago. Her spirit, it clings to the doll. She doesn't like to be ignored or abandoned." Emma's stomach churned. "I don't believe in ghosts." The old woman's lips twisted into a grim smile. "You don't have to believe. But you will. The doll chooses her owner carefully, and once she's chosen, there's no escape. Strange things will happen. Small at first, but they'll grow. The doll doesn't just want to stay. She wants to take." Emma shook her head, stepping away. "You're crazy," she muttered, quickening her pace. "Burn it if you can." The woman called after her. "But she won't let you." Emma didn't look back. She told herself the woman was just some superstitious old lady, trying to scare her. But her words stayed with Emma. That night, as Emma entered her apartment, the doll sat on the shelf where she had left it. But something was different. Its head was tilted slightly, and its lifelike eyes seemed to follow her. And when Emma turned off the lights, she could have sworn she heard a faint, childlike giggle echo in the darkness. The activity in Emma's apartment grew worse with each passing night. Small, unexplainable things began to happen during the day as well. The lights in her living room flickered no matter how many times the bulbs were replaced. The temperature in her bedroom was always colder than the rest of the apartment, even with the heater on. But it was the doll that unnerved her the most. One evening, Emma returned home from work, exhausted. She tossed her keys on the counter and froze. The doll, which she always kept on the bookshelf, was now sitting on the armrest of her couch. Its head was tilted at an odd angle, and its glassy eyes seemed to gleam in the dim light. Emma's heart raced. "Maybe I left it there," she whispered, though she knew she hadn't. She reached out hesitantly and placed the doll back on the shelf, her fingers trembling as she set it down. That night, Emma struggled to fall asleep. Every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the building, felt amplified in the silence. She pulled the blanket tightly around herself and squeezed her eyes shut. Then she heard it. A soft, scraping sound. Emma's eyes flew open, her breath catching in her throat. The sound was faint, but it was there, like something being dragged across the floor. She sat up, her heart pounding. The room was pitch black, but she didn't dare move to turn on the light. The scraping stopped. Silence hung in the air for a moment, and then she heard another sound. Tiny footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, and getting closer. Emma couldn't breathe. She reached for her phone on the nightstand, fumbling to turn on the flashlight. When the beam of light illuminated the room, she gasped. The doll was sitting on her desk chair, its hands resting on its lap as if it had been patiently waiting for her. Emma's blood turned cold. She grabbed the doll, ran to the closet, and shoved it inside, slamming the door shut. As she leaned against the door, trying to calm her racing heart, she heard a faint, childlike voice from inside the closet. "Why won't you play with me?" Emma couldn't ignore it anymore. The doll wasn't just an ordinary antique, it was something else, something sinister. Her nights were sleepless, filled with the sounds of faint whispers and the occasional chilling giggle that echoed through her dark apartment. She avoided looking at the doll now, leaving it locked in the closet. But even then, the feeling of being watched never left her. Desperate for answers, Emma spent hours researching online, digging into stories about haunted dolls and cursed objects. At first, all she found were wild theories and ghost stories. But then, she stumbled upon something that made her stomach churn, a black and white photograph of the very same doll, accompanied by an article about a tragedy from the late 1800s. The story described the wealthy Hensley family, who had lived in a grand Victorian mansion. Their youngest daughter, Clara, was known for her attachment to a porcelain doll, a doll with blue glass eyes and a cracked porcelain face. Clara had died under mysterious circumstances during a fire that destroyed the family home. Witnesses claimed to have seen Clara clutching the doll as the flames consumed her room. Her body was never found, but the doll was recovered from the ashes, completely unharmed. Emma's breath quickened as she read further. Over the decades, the doll had passed through many hands, and every owner had reported strange occurrences, unexplained noises, movements, and, in some cases, vivid dreams of Clara herself. Some claimed the doll was a vessel for Clara's restless spirit, seeking revenge or companionship. Emma's hands shook as she closed the laptop. She glanced at the closet door, dread pooling in her stomach. She didn't want to open it, but the oppressive feeling in the room made her feel like she had no choice. She approached the closet slowly, her heart pounding. With trembling hands, she opened the door. The doll was sitting on the floor, exactly where she had left it. But something was different now. Its head was tilted slightly, and its glassy eyes seemed to gleam with a new intensity. Emma's voice was barely a whisper. "What do you want?" The air around her grew icy, and a soft, childlike voice echoed through the room. "You know what I want," it said. Emma was losing her grip on reality. The doll's presence consumed her thoughts. Every creak of the floor, every flicker of light, made her jump. She couldn't eat, she couldn't sleep, and the whispers, oh, the whispers, followed her everywhere, growing louder each night. Determined to end it, Emma decided to return the doll to the antique shop. She grabbed the doll, wrapped it in an old blanket, and rushed out of her apartment. The cold night air stung her face as she hurried to the street where she had first found the shop. But when she arrived, her heart sank. The shop was gone. In its place was an empty, boarded-up building that looked like it had been abandoned for years. "No, this can't be," Emma whispered, clutching the doll tighter. Panic clawed at her chest. She turned and began walking aimlessly, her mind racing. She needed to get rid of the doll, but how? An idea struck her. The river. Emma sprinted to the nearest bridge, her breath coming in gasps. When she reached the edge, she held the doll over the dark, rushing water. "This is it," she said aloud, her voice shaking. "It's over." She let go. The doll plummeted into the river, vanishing beneath the surface. Relief washed over her as she stood there, catching her breath. For the first time in weeks, the air felt lighter. She returned home, convinced the nightmare was finally behind her. But that night, Emma woke to the sound of faint humming. Her heart stopped. She recognized the melody, it was the same lullaby she had heard in her dreams. Terrified, she turned on the lamp beside her bed. And there it was. The doll. It was sitting on her nightstand, its glassy blue eyes staring directly at her. Its dress was damp, water dripping onto the wooden surface. Emma screamed, scrambling out of bed. "No, I got rid of you." The room grew deathly cold. The lamp flickered and went out, plunging her into darkness. A soft, childlike voice spoke from the shadows. "You can't leave me, Emma. You're mine now." The last thing Emma saw was the doll's eyes blinking in the dark before everything went silent. As the darkness closes in, our journey tonight comes to an end, but the shadows still whisper their secrets, and some stories are better left untold, or are they? If you've made it this far, you've felt the chill of the unknown, and remember, this won't be our last meeting. The night is never truly silent, and there's always something lurking, watching, waiting. Until we cross paths again, stay vigilant, and sleep tight, if you can. If you enjoy this story, so please subscribe my channel and set bell icon on all. Also share my video to others and like my video as appreciation. Thanks.